Hey guys, I'm Rich from NeoWin. Today we're unboxing the Moto G6. So, Motorola announced 4 phones in the United States a couple weeks ago. There was 2 from the Moto E line and 2 from the Moto G line. So the Moto G line is the G6 Play and the G6. There is also a third of each which aren't available in the United States. So you can't get the Moto G6 Plus here. Now, Motorola's line of phones has become very confusing. You might recall that back in the day there was a Moto E, a Moto G, and a Moto X. The X was the flagship, the G was the mid-range, the E was the low-end. Things have changed. Now we have the Moto Z Force, which is the flagship lineup, and there's also a Z Play, which is a little lower end, but it has a bigger battery. And so the big thing about the Moto Z is that it's modular, and you could add what they call Moto mods on here. And then the Moto X is the upper mid-range. This is the X4, and the X lineup recently made a return. You can see it's a beautiful device. And the reason I'm showing you all this is because it is kind of a confusing lineup now, and it's important to see where the Moto G line sits, because the Moto G has always been about value for your dollar, and it's always been one of the best phones that you can get for around $200. So we're going to open this up. This has a Snapdragon 450 processor in it, right? So the Moto Z2, it has a... Is this attached? Yeah, this is attached. The Moto Z2 has a Snapdragon 835. The X4 has a 600 series. By the way, we have this little keychain in here. This is pretty cool. It's a little 1973... Oh, this is attached also. This is a little 1973, the Dynatac or whatever it's called. This was the first cell phone. So when they did the pre-briefing on this, you might have seen some pictures online of people recreating that first phone call from 1973. And Motorola announced this thing in 1973. There was another 10 years of research and development that had to go into it, and it came out in 1983. It's a little bit of cell phone history there. But this is the Moto G6. Right, so you can see it's very similar in design to the X4. The flash is for some reason on the bottom now. Okay, the fingerprint reader is on the front. It's not over here like it is on some of the other G6 models, and the I believe the E Plus is the one with the fingerprint reader, and the E5 Play does not have it. Okay, so while this boots up, we can take a look at what else is in the box. All right, some paperwork. USB Type-A power adapter, and of course we have our USB Type-A to Type-C cable for charging. And yes, this does use USB Type-C. Many other devices that come in at this price point will still use micro USB, so that's a big deal. And in fact, I believe the G6 Play uses micro USB, as do the new Moto E5 phones. Alright, went through some of the setup steps here. We're going to add a fingerprint reader. Found the sensor. Fantastic. Jesus, what's with all these steps? Alright, so let's set this up. It takes a lot of impressions of your fingerprint before... should vary slightly each time. I know how to set up a fingerprint. Anyway, next, and that's our fingerprint. Got it. This should boot into the phone now, hopefully. Shouldn't be too much more. Google Assistant. There's so many steps in the out-of-box experience now, and it's kind of weird at this point, because it doesn't really have to be that way. I find that when I'm setting up an Android device, it's almost like too much. There's just so much going on here, and then here's a bunch of other things you can do, and the thing is, and this is actually not the worst. It's actually other companies that put heavier skins on it. Like Motorola doesn't really put a heavy skin on the phone. Other companies, they'll just add stuff on top of what Google has, and it's redundant at times. So what we have here, we have an 18:9 display, 1080p. And that's 5.7 inches. So this is one of the first 18:9 phones that Motorola has made. It might actually be the first, because Motorola didn't jump on that bandwagon when it did the Z2 Force last year. This is still 16:9. It's OLED. It's lovely, by the way. And they didn't do it with the X4, which I have here, also 16:9. I'm not thrilled with the 18:9 display trend that's going on. Personally, I think a nice 16:9 phone is fantastic. We have the Moto launcher here, which is also really nice. This is an IPS LCD, by the way. It's not OLED like we've seen from the Z2. It's not shatterproof. Doesn't have the modularity that the Z2 offers. But what this phone is really about, though, is bringing down some of those flagship features that we've seen from the higher end phones like the Z2. So I'm talking about camera features. So when they did the Moto X4, this has a dual camera, and they added all those camera features that we first saw in the Z2, and that came in at about $400. Now you're seeing it at the $200 price point. And we have that dual camera here, which is 12 megapixels and 5 megapixels, f1.8 aperture, 8 megapixel front camera, and that records up to 1080p. And the rear camera should, according to the reviewer's guide, it records up to 1080p, but at 60 frames per second. So that's a nice touch there. And let's go into our settings and let's just confirm that, because that's pretty cool. I don't think I've ever seen... Yeah, 1080p, 60 frames per second. That's fantastic, because I don't think I've ever seen a mid-range phone that only goes up to 1080p, but still does 60 frames per second. So a lot of these new camera features here, they're focusing on portrait mode, which is that kind of fake bokeh effect. Let's see, again, tons of notifications when you first start using a phone, and I find it really frustrating. But anyway, that fake bokeh effect. So what you can do, there's selective focus, and if you use the portrait mode, what you can do, again, more notifications, got it, thanks. You can adjust the amount of blur in the background, and what you can also do is after you take the picture, you can adjust what's blurred. So say we keep the Motorola box in focus and then the background is blurred there. We could change it after the fact so that the plug there is what's in focus. There's also a feature called Selective Black-and-White. So if you take a portrait mode picture, you can go back and the only thing in this picture that would be colorized would be maybe the Motorola box or the table. You know, you can pick one color to stick with. So if we get rid of this, there's also spot color. So that's when you're taking the picture, and then you can just pick which color you want to keep. There's green there, and now it gets rid of everything else. So you can see that some of it doesn't always work perfectly, and what you have to do is you kind of have to adjust how much color you want to remove. All right, and see, that does it kind of nicely. And there you go. We have a cool little photo here with just color. Right, so if you want to do it while you're taking the picture, you have to use that spot color, and you can really only pick one color. Selective Black-and-White does give you more options, but unfortunately, you have to take the portrait mode photo to do that. So, I mean, there's some cool things that you can do with these pictures. There's also, I forget what they call it, but you can take objects from one picture and put it on top of the other, and that's all with the portrait mode. And unfortunately, you just don't have these kinds of tools if you don't use the portrait mode. But yeah, so it's a pretty cool phone. I mean, like I said, Snapdragon 450 processor, which is octa-core, 1.8 gigahertz, and that would be all ARM Cortex A53. So talking about the processor a little bit, it's all, like I said, all ARM Cortex A53, 1.8 gigahertz. That means that it's not really doing the big dot little thing where it has more powerful cores to take on more powerful tasks, and then it's saving battery life by using more efficient cores that use less power to get those tasks done. So that's like syncing background notifications when the phone's asleep, and that's why our phones don't use that much battery when they're asleep, even though they're still doing things. So you kind of lose that benefit with the Snapdragon 450, but you do have 8 cores, so you can do a lot of multitasking type of things. All right. 3 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes of RAM, 32 gigabytes or 64 gigabytes of storage. Let's see what model they sent me, because that's what I want to know. I want 64 gigs. Oh, no, they gave me 32 gigs. That's cool, though. But that's really cool, right? Because this is a budget phone, more or less. I would say lower mid-range. So 3 or 4 gigs of RAM and up to 64 gigs of storage is huge at that price point. 3,000 milliamp hour battery, 15-watt turbo power charger that's included. One thing, it now has a glass back and it does not have wireless charging. And when I asked them about that, see, Huawei did this with their new P20 flagships, and they said wireless charging is just too slow to include it. What Motorola told me was they just kind of laughed and they said, not at that price point, which is fair enough because you do get a lot here for the price. Anyway, guys, that's it. I'm going to be using this phone for about a month. It comes unlocked, as do most Motorola phones, at least the less expensive ones. So I'm going to be using it on T-Mobile. It should support all 4 major carriers. But that's it. Give me about a month. I'll have a review up. I'm Rich from NeoWin. Have a great night.